Golf Central on YouTube is brought to you by the new Chrome Tour golf ball from Callaway.
Well, our next guest is a senior writer for golf.com and a best-selling author. Michael Bamberger has written 8 nonfiction books. The most recent, Ball in the Air, it's a good one. He's also the author of 4 autobiographical works, including one recently celebrating its 30th anniversary and re-release. To the Linksland follows Bamberger's travels on the European tour while caddying for Peter Terian, and it also details his journey across Scotland with his wife and playing some courses off the beaten path in the birthplace of the game during the early 90s. Hi, Mike. Congrats on the re-release of the book. Personally, I loved it. I know you and I have talked about that. A lot of people did. You know, as an author, especially with something personal, you hope for that type of reaction. But we sometimes kind of get wrapped up in our own stuff. Are you surprised at all that it touched so many people the way it did? And why do you think it might have?
Well, thank you, Jimmy. You know, just a quick note about that. I see you wearing plaid coat, striped tie. I didn't know that was a thing until I went to Scotland. And of course, as you know, they pulled it off there like nobody's business. I think the thing about that To the Linksland book is people have been very generous about it. It's probably hugely overrated. But I think what people do attach about it is that my wife and I were newlyweds. We didn't have kids. We didn't have a mortgage. And we just sort of packed up and hit the road. And we hit the road in a way that a lot of golfers can relate to, because I became a caddy on the European tour. And then I spent a summer exploring nooks and crannies in Scotland. So, you know, there's a fantasy element to it, or as they say in the TV business now, wish fulfillment.
You know, one of the themes of the book was you seem to perceive, I don't know, what would seem to be an inflated sense of ego and self for a number of the top players back in the 90s. How is professional golf different now in that regard, or is it?
What, Jimmy, are you saying that back then they had an overblown sense of themselves?
Yes, in your perception, you know, you as a caddy and coming at it from a distance, and all of a sudden you were up close. That's the way it came off to me as a reader.
It's hilarious. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I mean, if you could compare self-absorption in that era to self-absorption today, it's night and day. So self-absorption then was Nick Faldo, the height of his powers, Seve coming back, Sandy Lyle, who was always a modest person, Bernhard, who was always a modest person, a lot the ball, you know, and then the United States, Curtis, who's, Curtis Strange, and of course, Tom Watson was still in his game. But I didn't quite view it that way. I reviewed it more as these people were rugged individualists. I've written this many times, and I'm sure we've talked about this, Jimmy, that if you scratch the surface of these people, they were cowboys who really thought for themselves. And I found that immensely appealing. And I found that immensely appealing, and you and I are the same age, as a kid in the 70s falling in love with golf, whether it was Hubert Green or Lee Trevino or John Mahaffey, you know, or Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus or Arnold, really at the end of his run. But Trevino probably most especially of the whole group, that sense of rugged individualism and I will figure this out for myself. Mm-hmm. Was central to the characters. I think the generation that's into the Linksland really followed in that tradition. And now, of course, it's science, so it's different.
Yeah, it certainly does seem a lot different, you know. And as I mentioned, if there's one guy that we got to know better than all the rest in your books, it was Peter Terian. Kind of a quirky, talented, and interesting character. You caddied for him. You still in touch with him?
Very much so, yeah. Peter lives in Singapore, and he's devised... We both have a friend, Jim McCabe, who's a longtime Boston Globe writer, and Jim and I are both very much in touch with Peter. Peter married a woman from Singapore, made a life in Singapore, raised a daughter there. Peter played golf at Yale. In the history of Yale golf, which is a really rich history, he's by far the best player they've ever had, although now there's a young player coming up who might give Peter a run for his money. Just a quick funny note about Peter. He played the European tour for years. He had a string where he missed, like, let's say, a dozen straight cuts. And then out of nowhere, he won the Czech Open. And he made 100,000 pounds for that. And his quote to reporters afterwards was, "Now I'm up for broke." And in that same period, Colin Montgomery, I was not on the bag for this, by the way. But in that same period, Colin Montgomery, who's always trying to learn something about the game. So, like, Peter, you're playing so poorly. You're kind of a journeyman who's just trying to make cuts. What did you do down this stretch to try to win this Czech Open? You never went on the European Tour before. And Peter said, Colin, I just tried to pretend that it was a Friday afternoon and I had to play the last 3 holes in even par to make the cut. And on that basis, I played the last 3 holes in even par and won the tournament. And as Peter tells the story, Colin just walked away scratching his head because it meant nothing to him.
All right, one last pivot here. You've written about Tiger Woods. He's just a couple of years away from turning 50. I think once many of us would have scoffed at the idea that he would play senior golf. I don't think anybody's scoffing now. Can you imagine the impact that he would have on the PGA Tour champions? And any guess how much he might play?
I couldn't guess because everything I predict about Tiger is wrong. But I love what I call the 3 senior majors: U.S. Open, British Open, PGA. They've been around for a long time. You get a great prize. You get a great trophy. Got to get a lot of money. They're on really good courses. Jimmy, you were up at Newport last week, Newport Country Club, for the U.S. Senior Open. Billy Harmon was the head pro there years ago, our mutual friend. It would be really neat if Tiger were in good enough shape where he could say, I'm going to make it a goal to win these 3 majors. What I'd really love to do is win these 3 majors in 1 year. That's asking a lot. But it could be a very limited kind of focus, along with, maybe playing the Masters here and there. But the courses are shorter, and his skill set, his whole body wiring is really for one thing, and that is to play competitive golf at the highest level possible. Well, right now for him to play those 3 senior majors, I think would be really, really a neat thing. Big Jack's won them all. Gary Player, Trevino, I believe, has. Watson, I'm not sure, but he certainly won 2 of them. Tom Weiskopf won a U.S. Senior Open. So I think it would be a really neat thing for Tiger to focus on. And, of course, if you could get the band back out, which is not likely, but get Phil to play and BJ to play and Ernie and Davis Love and, some of the guys who beat Tiger sometimes and he beat more often. I'm not going to say it would be like reliving the glory days, but it could be a lot of fun. I think, just to finish that one point, Jimmy, I think what's going to happen in professional golf is there are natural points of interest for the millions of golf fans across the world. And the Ryder Cup is certainly one of them. And, of course, the 4 majors are one of them. And the U.S. Women's Open is one of them. The Women's PGA Championship is one of them. And some of these senior majors could be on this list. And people could be less discriminating about, like, oh, I follow the PGA Tour, or, oh, I follow LIV, or, oh, I follow women's golf. And the broad look at the schedule, when we really get excited about things, could be more of a hodgepodge schedule of some seniors, some women's, some PGA Tour, and sometimes when we combine the groups.
Yeah. Tiger loves competition, and he loves golf. Mike, we know you love golf, too. You've been around it a long time. Love your writing. To the Linksland, 30th anniversary. It's out again. Michael Bamberger, thanks for joining us.
So nice to have me. Thanks, Jimmy.